Natural rivals exist everywhere, and I'm not talking about red versus blue, I'm talking about nature. When the toxic-tailed Seviper clashes with the relentless power of Zangoose, the battle over territory between Morellul and Parasect, aggressive clashes between Hydreigon and Noivern in the dead of night, and of course the legendary beef between Pokemon such as Rayquaza and Deoxys, who has beef on sight. Plenty of Pokemon go toe-to-toe with each other as they compete for food, home, water, or even just to survive, as they do everything they can to not become another Pokemon's meal. And after surviving the dramatic throwdowns between tiny Pokemon and Titans alike, I can now bring to you every natural rival in the world of Pokemon. Howdy there, I'm Krillek, and rivals come as easily in the natural world as any other place, except, of course, the rivals in the natural world have beef on sight and may eat each other. Today's goal is not to just tell you what these rivalries are, but to explore the Pokemon themselves, some of their real-life inspirations, and to ultimately just figure out why in the world do these Pokemon hate each other so much. After all, Pokemon typically roots their reasoning in myth or the natural world, meaning we might even find that for any Pokemon with real-life counterparts, they might also be rivals. Finally, we are not covering Pokemon like Corsola and Mareanie, which are prey and predator relationships, or Pokemon like Beedrill, who are incredibly territorial and just fight anything that enters its territory. I want strict relationships where the two Pokemon are rivals to each other. There are some cases where one might eat the other, or both might try to eat each other, but we'll get there soon enough. For starters, we have Pokemon that aren't even of different species fighting against each other, but rather Pokemon of the same species fighting over mates with the Nidoking and Nidoqueen lines. This is the first example of rivals through just the ability Rivalry, an ability that is actually given to Pokemon that typically fight with their own kind in territorial disputes or whenever they're fighting over the same mate. And in the case of Nidoking and Nidoqueen, they have big fights over mates. This isn't even seen in the games to my knowledge, but at least within the Pokemon Adventures manga, we get to see two Nidoking really going at it. I mean, slamming into each other and everything, and no, not in the dirty way. Their rage isn't reserved solely for each other either, because as Red attempted to catch a Nidoking in the Safari Zone, he misses and catches a Nidoqueen, which unfortunately is a major issue as both Nidoking begin to target him, and let me tell you, they are some ruthless monsters. One continues to pursue him even after getting its eye hurt, resulting in what I called punished Nidoking when I covered the entire Red arc in its own video. But again, we never get to see these Pokemon get into battles over mates anywhere else to my knowledge. Now, the closest we can get to a real-life inspiration with these things are probably rhinos, if you don't want to just take in the whole idea of kaiju. And of course, rhinos are going to get into aggressive fights over mates and territory, often injuring each other in incredibly violent horn stabbing and pushing contests as they clash into each other like they're two living aggressive cars. So it makes sense that, we would see this reflected in Nidoking and Nidoqueen lines. Following this, we have a pair of mushrooms that despise each other since one serves as the destroyer of forests, and the other likes to keep balance and restore the forests. Of course, I'm talking about the Paras and Morellul lines. On one hand, the mushroom-infested cicadas that are Paras serve to grow into their fully zombified Parasect forms and leech on trees until the day that they pass away. Other than making time to mate for babies and serving as the nightmare of everyone's Legends Arceus run, they really don't do anything else. They eat, breed, die. Still have yet to make that a shirt? I will eventually. Though, at least in the non-canonical lore, there was supposed to be a baby version named Para that would be born inside of the mushroom, emerge, and then the rest of canon lore would kick in as Mama Parasect sprinkles spores onto its baby to continue the cycle of life and semi-death for its species. They will actively infest forests and grow their colony as they do not stop leeching on trees until there are 0 nutrients left for it to intake. Then comes walking in Morellul and Shiinotic on their little mycelium roots that they have, which calling them roots was a really wrong thing to say, but I think you get it. These Pokemon are scary when we just look at their Pokédex. Morellul's flickering spores lure in prey and put them to sleep. Once this Pokemon has its prey snoozing, it drains their vitality with its fingertips, kind of like an ET situation. Though, when we look at the anime, we get to see that they do this to restore the forest itself. In addition, this vitality is the same as life energy, both not being your literal soul, but moreover your stamina. something that can be restored with sleep, food, water, basic stuff for overall recovery, so it's not nearly as dangerous as it seems. In addition, both of these Pokemon lines tend to live in the same humid and wooded areas, exactly as you would expect of fungus in general. And since they're able to move around so much, being ambulatory, it's easy to understand why they would end up in fights so often. What I wonder is, if their spores are detecting each other, it wouldn't be too far-fetched to imagine that they have some level of sense of perception through their spores after all. It would be no different than how any other mushroom or plant would feel the wind or feel the approach of a threatening predator. Except now, these Pokemon can go toe-to-toe and fart out their spores everywhere and cause massive forests of mushrooms to just disappear. This is also not all that different from real world, or the real world, as we do have something called the Wood Wide Web. This is an interconnected network of roots from plants and mycelium from mushrooms that communicate and even share things like water and nutrients between each other, especially with trees. The largest mycelium network we are currently aware of is from a single specimen known as the honey fungus within Oregon's Malheur National Forest. This thing covers over 2,385 acres, or 3.7 square miles, which translates to about 9.58 square kilometers, and measures out to being over 2,000 years old as well, which I personally could have sworn that last time I did research on this thing, it was only estimated in terms of coverage on how far it actually reaches, and that it actually goes further than we can actually realistically measure, and this is, again, just an estimate, but I couldn't find any additional information confirming that. But just imagine a much larger Pokemon deep underground that is connected to many more mushroom Pokemon, and that would be really cool to see. But again, when we look at Morellul and Parasect and their lines, you can then see how this relationship has been translated into Pokemon. One that becomes a parasite and leeches off of nature itself, and one that serves to just restore nature and restore that balance from the things that have fallen. Cantonian Meowth and Galarian Meowth don't get along, which is a bit more surprising, as I would expect Alolan and Galarian Meowth to have fighting words with each other, fighting claws even, but I realize there's a one-word reason as to why that isn't the case. Feral. While Cantonian Meowth and Persian are still pampered to some degree and cared for by at least people such as Giovanni, this is technically not the same for our Alolan friends, at least when we look at their history. The Alolan Meowth and Persian were originally the Cantonian versions that were brought in and bred by royalty for a deeper blue coat, a new colored coin and gem, rounded head, and the personality that they would eventually earn. This is no different than breeding in the real world, as people will go for traits they find attractive. Unfortunately, this causes defects, and in Alolan Persian's case, we get that big old oval head. Even more unfortunate is when the fall of the royal Alolan line occurred. Then, all of these Meowth escaped into the wild and became feral. What's important to understand is this: an animal gone feral is considered an animal that was once a domesticated creature, and when they do go feral, they tend to develop new traits, physical and psychological, such is the case when we compare pigs that become feral pigs and compare those to boars. They become so much more aggressive, and it's through this feral nature, or this feral transformation, that the Alolan Meowth has gained that it then actually relates to the more feral, or rather definitive savage nature of the Galarian Meowth, with these fluffy cats having lived rougher lives in the wild that only become tougher as they sail with Vikings and become Berserker, a much more lethal, hardy, and powerful Pokemon. I had recently thought that they get along because of the no thoughts, head empty look of Galarian Meowth, but I think now that it really is this shared feral nature that they get along. Alolan Meowth being underhanded in order to do anything it has to in order to survive, while Galarian Meowth is ready to swing on anyone that stands between it and the thing that it wants, all while the traditional Cantonian Meowth and Persian continue to be pampered by people throughout their generations, maybe not getting that high-end royal life, but still having a cushier life than what is typical of the regional variants. And of course, while the Cantonian and Alolan Meowth can still get along because they both want to continue to be pampered, it seems like there's not even ground to be had with Galar's rough and tumble Meowth and Berserker. It's like a Venn diagram of personalities, and that's why we get the relationship that we have. Pinsir, Heracross, Vikavolt, Stag Beetle, Hercules Beetle, Stag Beetle 2 Electric Boogaloo. Now, Pinsir and Heracross are a classic, with the two of them fighting for the classic reason of wanting the same food. In fact, despite Pinsir being fit with those big ol' spooky horns, those are just for self-defense, and the same can be said about Heracross's incredible strength fit with the single giant horn, or rather, for Pinsir, it's more accurately that they will fight each other a little bit for mates most likely, in addition that it's an intimidation tactic and to help them push other creatures out of their territory. Now, these Pokemon, their diets, even reflect their real-world counterparts. Tree sap, beetle jelly, and overripe fruit for stag beetles. Then, tree sap and fermenting fruit for Heracross. Meaning that with these two Pokemon, they not only can effectively feed on detritus and sap, but with the fermenting fruit, that is exactly what we get in the form of apricorns. Apricorns are actually far too hard for any Pokemon to eat, although any Pokemon that is interested in eating them will wait until the fruit has ripened to the point of rotting. Of course then, making them softer. It might even allow better digestion of nutrients, but there's no way for me to actually confirm that. So at least with the case of Heracross and Pinsir, they're already fighting for similar territories that would let them get their fill of their favorite foods, with Pinsir being far more aggressive and greedy. But then we throw in the new lightning stag beetle found in Alola, and it is definitely not in the sharing mood. The Vikavolt line's diet changes from primarily sap as a grubbin to primarily humus as a chargebug, and then we don't get to hear anything regarding its diet afterwards, at least not directly. I'm willing to bet that Vikavolt is swinging on not just bugs, but also birds, because it's directly stated that Pokemon such as Rookity prey upon the little beetle grub. So of course, one way to lower the number of predators of your species and allow more of your kind to survive is to become this electrified bug that can take out your predators. And not on a date, I mean take them out, bury them, put the concrete shoes on their feet. But that isn't quite good enough, because the Vikavolt line is a species that cooperates with each other strongly for survival. Not only are the Vikavolt intelligent enough to carry Charjabug as a battery pack for more power, but when things get too intense, they will drop off the little green batteries into a safe space and return back to battle. This would then mean that Vikavolt's acts of aggression are likely no different than a mother bear and her cubs, a vicious creature prepared to destroy anything that threatens their young. And while Heracross may not directly do so, even if Pinsir can be very aggressive, they both serve to take food away from Vikavolt territory. This then results in Vikavolt being a sworn enemy of both Pinsir and Heracross, and those two, who are typically rivals, will actually team up to fight against Vikavolt. Enemy of my enemy is my friend. After all, ecology in the end is truly all about balance, and Vikavolt can't just be allowed to be over-aggressive across every region that they're found in. Something has to prevent them from expanding their territory too far and encroaching on other territories. It probably also helps that they evolve through magnetic fields or thunderstones, making them a rarer occurrence, or at least keeping their primary territory a more secluded or specialized one where many other Pokemon that would be considered threats won't trespass on. Up next are a couple of kaiju trying to play King of the Hill, except that hill is an entire mountain and they are willing to cause some pretty intense levels of destruction. Tyranitar and Duraludon have beef with each other, with Tyranitar living in nests made from demolished mountains. The two of them start fights with each other over territory because they live, or whenever they live, in the same areas, such as within Galar. Though this makes you wonder if there are other mountain dwellers that wouldn't be happy about this. For example, Aggron, who is known to protect its habitat fiercely, being a mountain, an entire mountain. And even after a battle, they're stated to help restore the land by doing things such as planting trees. Or let's say a natural disaster happens, that Aggron will work the land to make it better, to restore it. While all Pokemon are effectively inspired by kaiju, I do want to note that these three in particular draw on those classic depictions of kaiju. Large and powerful beasts that typically are stated to be much larger in size and have the ability to cause mass destruction. While the games don't do these guys justice, we can at least look at their massive sizes, which are portrayed better in things such as the anime or the manga, making them a very terrifying threat. Nevertheless, when your territory is the entire mountain and you are such a massive creature, it does make it difficult to find sources of food. For example, Aggron seeks out iron. Duraludon seems to seek out any minerals or metals it seems fit, but we also know that it's looking for metal alloys so it can evolve as we see it in Paldea into Archaludon, while Tyranitar might simply eat any bit of soil or rock that it feels like consuming. This creates a lot of conflict between them. And then we add in the strong temperaments of Tyranitar and Aggron, and you have the perfect mix of volatile personalities and Pokemon just trying to survive the best that they can. While we don't have much info outside of what little is stated as to their conflict, I'd like to imagine that lore-wise, the only reason we don't have more defined descriptions of their fighting is because their titanic battles cause so much destruction that it's unsafe to be anywhere near them. Add in the fact that these are likely incredibly rare encounters, and then people are lucky to know it even happens in the first place. As a final note, I could totally see the winner eating the other two since they're all eating similar minerals. Set with hidden ability Rivalry, we can add Beautifly as a Pokemon that opposes its own kind. But once again, we have to take this within context of why this is happening. And it's because males fight with males and females fight with females over potential mates. But how is that reflected in the real world? From butterflyconservation.org, I have the following. Courtship, for example, is important for many butterflies. Generally, female butterflies choose which males they want to mate with, and males therefore compete for the attention of females. Some males search for females, patrolling almost incessantly during good weather in the hope of encountering a receptive female, while others perch on a good vantage point to keep watch. Male peacock butterflies set up territories on the ground, for example, often in a sunny spot at the corner of a field, hedge, or woodland ride, while speckled woods often perch on plants in small pools of sunlight on the woodland floor, waiting to intercept passing females. Such territories are vigorously defended. Spectacular aerial fights take place between rival males, with the butterflies spiraling upwards, each trying to get above the other. Most often, the resident male wins this ritual battle and returns to his perch. Other insects, human observers, and even twigs thrown past a perching male all tend to elicit the same up and at 'em response. So yeah, even if you're of a different species, you're gonna get competed with. While Beautifly isn't a peacock butterfly, this is something that applies to many other butterflies, as briefly mentioned. And it should be no surprise considering competition is a constant thing across all species in terms of how one represents their qualities to a potential mate. This might even help partially explain the aggressive nature of Beautifly not wanting to be disturbed while collecting pollen. There are dex entries of them draining prey of fluids, but this is more akin to real-life butterflies and many other creatures in general getting their nutrients from cadavers. Nothing too crazy to worry about specifically there. With eyes for the sparkly things in life, Sableye and Gabite will often come to a head fighting each other. Though the reason for their fighting is different, even though they may not only fight for minerals, but also fight for Carbink, who's got those good diamonds inside of its body. As we know, Sableye eats crystals and gems, and while its art has never really reflected it, at least in lore, the gems that it eats will then affect its appearance as they grow on its body, which is one of the sickest alternative forms within Pokemon that we never really get to see, just like Arbok's many hood patterns, which at least those are seen within the Pokemon Adventures manga. Opposite to Sableye though, is Gabite, who will drag Pokemon like Carbink, Bronzor, and then any other sparkly things in this world away deep underground into its nest to never see the light of day ever again if it gets the choice. This is pretty easily explained because this is just your typical dragon behavior, as they like to hoard things. And as a side, I love the ideas people have where if you were a dragon, maybe you wouldn't just hoard treasure in the traditional sense, but rather choose other objects. And I wonder what you would choose. For example, I would hoard books and take entire libraries if I could. Just stack them on top of each other like Duplo blocks. Or Legos. I don't know why I went to Duplo. Meanwhile, other people might just collect all the forks of the world. Back to Gabite, it's an aggressive Pokemon that is just best to stay away from if you want to stay intact. But when you both have the same targets, two different species, same target, it makes it hard for Sableye to stay away. It's also incredibly hilarious and unfortunate that in Alola, when Pokemon call for help, a Carbink might end up calling a Sableye by accident, and it just gets jumped even more by the trainer and the Sableye together. Similar to this within Haina Desert, during a sandstorm, any Pokemon can call for help, and there's a chance that a Gabite appears, which is pretty bad because either you are getting eaten by it or you are being made a prisoner of it. And thinking about it further, Gabite probably decimates Sableye and then takes all the gems from its body, just plucking them out. We know those gems are able to be pulled out, at least from what we are told and what we see with Mega Sableye. So there might be a couple of Sableye out there in the world without any gems that have all fallen to the hands of a Gabite. This next one is a bit strange because Spoink gets its pearl from Clamperl, but the problem with Clamperl is that the pearl is not a pearl but rather an egg within a pearl. I've talked about this in so many videos, but here we go again, because while we don't actually know how eels reproduce, they are thought to reproduce through external fertilization like many other forms of marine life. In the case of eels, specifically the form of external fertilization they use is thought to be where they just release everything into the water all around, which, you know, explains the salty taste in the water. But now clams, on the other hand, are typically filter feeders, and while Clamperl does state that it clamps down on prey and waits until they stop moving so it can eat them, it is still likely filtering food or something in general. When clams get something like sand in their mouth and it causes irritation, they coat it in what is called nacre over and over again, which then encases the irritant, separates it from the body, and creates a pearl. So when we put all these bits of information together, we get the idea that the collective sperm and egg combined with Clamperl's body to then become an irritant that is encased in a protective pearl and result in a proper egg that will eventually evolve into either of these eels. Now, this is already a bit gross, but then we throw in the fact that Spoink actively steals this egg from Clamperl and wears it on its head to increase its power. Give me the baby! Give me the baby! And I personally don't see a face on that pearl anymore, so you know, Spoink may have actually killed it. But hold on! Before you all get your pitchforks and torches, because there is the chance that while something may have formed, it doesn't mean that it was properly fertile. Just like with traditional eggs, because this is supposed to be an egg. The creature inside may just be meant to eat the yolk for its first nutrients, just like with chicken eggs. In this case, the yolk would be the nacre itself. And I'll take it a little bit further, as I admit this is pretty unlikely since eels are primarily carnivorous. So what likely actually happens is much worse. The egg hatches, and the reason Gorbis has shells on its chest is because those were once the Clamperl. That then the egg hatches, or rather when it hatches, it eats the inside of Clamperl and then decorates its own body with its discarded carcass. That's pretty rough. And this isn't even an easy feat, by the way, for Spoink to go ahead and get the pearl, because Spoink isn't going to be able to bounce easily into the water, and Clamperl isn't going to just let this happen. Can you imagine a Spoink trying to bounce and it just keeps floating? Its heart will eventually stop because every bounce is a heartbeat. Ultimately, this is just a really odd situation, and I wouldn't blame you for not considering these Pokemon rivals or taking all of this with a heavy grain of salt, as you always should, but it's also not really a predator-prey relation, so it gets a little bit messy. We're finally at the thumbnail Pokemon with plenty more to go, but before we continue, I just want to say thank you for watching. If you made it this far, I'm confident you'll love the rest of this video and other content on the channel, so please make sure you subscribe and check those out. In addition, leaving comments and liking the video does help boost the reach, which is greatly appreciated, and if you'd like to go the extra mile, become a member of the channel for as little as $3 a month here or on Patreon. Not only do you get early access to videos, at least on YouTube, behind the scenes info, and your name in the credits, but you also get members exclusive videos where I explore things that wouldn't quite make it into its own video like this, or just things that you guys get to vote on. But enough of all that. Once again, thank you for watching, and on with the video. Zangoose and Seviper is a tale as old as time, but not in the romantic way, since these two have beef on sight. It's directly stated that Seviper shares a generations-long feud with Zangoose. The scars on its body are evidence of vicious battles. For clarification, I assume then that some of the purple markings are meant to represent scars, which makes sense. The purple markings are on the face, chest, quote unquote, and base of the tail. All places that would be spots where it would likely be clawed at to then push back fangs or the tail and get a deadly blow in. Meanwhile, with Zangoose, we have similar markings on hands, chest, and one of its ears. Memories of battling its arch rival Seviper are etched into every cell of Zangoose's body as per its Pokédex. If it comes across a Seviper, its fur bristles and it assumes its battle pose. Its sharp claws are its best weapon. But what's even the start of this feud? Why does it happen? What's the inspiration? Well, it might just be based on their real-life counterparts, which it is. Mongoose in real life have harnessed the ability to effectively fight venomous snakes in the wild. They aren't exactly immune, but they are resistant to the effects of their venom. The sheer number of adaptations they have allows this. They have mutated acetylcholine receptors that prevent the neurotoxins from binding to their own cells. Their thick fur helps prevent the teeth from digging deep, almost like a soft armor. They have incredible reflexes, and they may even be able to develop the ability to neutralize the venom through enough exposure to it in their singular life. To explain that last part, introducing your body in a safe and professional manner, or through general repeated exposure, brings the opportunity for your body to recognize threats and develop ways to fight it. This is how some people are able to get sick, have a mild effect, get over the sickness, and then not get sick from the same strain of virus. This is assuming it's not something that was has a high mortality rate, because, you can't heal if you're dead. There's also that one guy who he knew he would be around rattlesnakes, and he lived very far from the hospital. And so what he would do is he would give himself, or professionally, he was given doses of rattlesnake venom over and over and over again in larger and larger amounts over time. And when he actually got bit by one, because of his response, like his body's then response having built a tolerance to it, he was able to survive the ride to the hospital. This still doesn't quite answer why Seviper and Zangoose fight with each other though, at least not until we look at the very basis of their existence. The snake is meant to hunt the mongoose, or at least that's how it once was. Imagine a snake in an environment in which it held hardly any threats to its life whatsoever. It would only be held back by the amount of food that it could eat and the number of babies that it could have. That is, until a hawk comes to grab it. But what if there was another prey species that would come into contact with venomous snakes time and time again, happening so often that the prey in its search for food would have no choice but to fight the snake? And that's where the mongoose comes in. Food, territory, survival, these driving factors brought the two species to clash time and time again, and they would eventually know instinctively to see each other as threats that have to be fought. And if we bring this connection into the world of Pokemon, I would expect there to have been a less visually aggressive version of Zangoose that existed in the world before its species came into contact with the Viper species in their own efforts of survival. And then, of course, over the years and many generations, that feud would be sewed deep into their genetic DNA. Which is redundant to say, but, dramaticism. Ready for another Pokemon with a rivalry ability? I hope so, because we got Shinx, and honestly speaking, I may as well bring up Litleo's line as well, since they also have rivalry, and these two Pokemon lines are our big cat Pokemon. With Shinx being an electric lynx, the following is noted by National Geographic, as they had discovered two lynx not only up in a tree screaming, but more specifically, screaming in a heated battle as they fought, recognizing each other as competition for the mate they would be pursuing. Despite their in-game counterparts being a bit more on the aggressive side in nature, as we see in Legends Arceus, in the real world, these lynx typically weigh no more than 40 pounds, and protective mothers have actually walked away from photographers getting too close to their den. So they aren't exactly actually aggressive creatures and are more about making a loud racket. That's not to say you should approach them, please be safe and don't do anything stupid. And ultimately, this isn't uncommon in the wild world, as fighting takes a lot of energy. It's better to show off the muscles, make yourself look big, have confidence, and scream your head off to show how you're the dominant one, instead of actually fighting and losing precious calories when you don't know when your next meal will be, assuming that you survive the battle and don't get any lasting damage. Alternative to this though, the Litleo line, or more specifically, male Pyroar, may not be as forgiving or docile in terms of physical combat. Once again, they don't state anything about being combative, but still have Rivalry as an ability, and lines in the real world, while not fighting often, may engage in some seriously horrifying combat that results in death. But it's more than just fighting for a mate or the rights to mate. It's about showing proper dominance over the pack. Meanwhile, there are females that will aggressively defend their territory against other females, making it so that even female Pyroar are getting their punches in. This really puts Wild Zone 17 and Legend ZA into perspective. That zone has caused so many deaths, and I'm amazed they haven't just decided to nuke it. Jet is out here talking about coming to Lumiose because of property values dropping, and it's kind of clear why when there's an alpha lion that weighs probably twice as much as a regular Pyroar, putting it likely over 400 pounds and being 3 meters tall. Do you realize how large that is, how tall that is? That would effectively be taller than the first floor of a building. Imagine waking up to its face just peeking into your room. The only good thing is that it won't burn you alive because it doesn't like its food cooked. Either way, these big cats have some big claws, and either of them would be pretty horrifying to see in the middle of a fight for mating rights or anything else. Another classic we have is with Rampardos and Bastiodon. Now, I will openly say that this is also technically a predator and prey relationship by Pokemon standards, as Rampardos actively attacks and eats other Pokemon. Unfortunately for it, Bastiodon is the immovable shield to Rampardos' unstoppable spear, perfect opposites to each other. On one hand, you have Rampardos, who is actively bashing its skull into everything. It's gonna bash its head into prey, into trees, walls, children, your grandmother, and of course a confirmed instance in the modern day when one broke out of containment and broke a skyscraper. Great times. They are noted to be pretty stupid, and it's because they, unlike their real counterparts, have actually lost brain mass in place of getting a much larger and thicker dome that you could advertise to space with. The thicker, rocky head is what has allowed it to smash through all these things and keep charging on. Makes sense that it would become a predator, since when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's just more efficient to eat whatever you crush along the way then. Opposite to this, we have the grazer that is Shieldon and Bastiodon. Their kind also being able to advertise to space with their big old domes, though instead of offense, they were made for defense. After probably getting smacked around enough and defending itself with the shield face it has, it would adapt to this massive riot shield-like face that is incredibly heavy but effectively impenetrable. As a side, I really need to make that video on why Pokemon evolve into their evolutions. Like, why did it evolve into this? Not just, oh, it evolves into this, because that'd be really fun. Now, the only issue with this impenetrable, quote-unquote, riot shield face is that it's so heavy that it's hard to move around. So if a Pokemon was smart and fast enough, it could just get behind Bastiodon, Omairimo Shinderu, and strike it down for good. Not to say this would be an easy feat though, there's still powerful Pokemon that are pretty durable. I also wouldn't be surprised to find out that they line themselves up like a phalanx or in a full circle formation in order to prevent their hindquarters from being shanked while also keeping their babies in the center nice and safe. If you're looking to learn a lot more about the prehistoric world of dinosaurs, I have a whole video on that which you should check out, so let's move on for now. More rivalry, but this time we get it in the Pidove Line, or Pidove Line is how it should be pronounced. And while it is super goofy to imagine this little goober trying to be aggressive with others of its kind, it's for no different reasons that we've already talked about with other Pokemon having rivalry that they do fight. Though the biggest difference this time is that there's a lot more wing slapping, feathers flying, pecking, and trying to properly impress the ladies by showing they can be the strongest pigeon on the block. But what I find more interesting is that the Pidove Line are noted to start off as unintelligent and forgetful, evolve into Tranquil, who is supposed to never fight other Pokemon, and then Unpheasant, who gains stronger sexual dimorphism, so that way the males can really strut their stuff with pink head tassels. It's so wild to consider that male birds so often get such crazy, pretty coloring and flares to their bodies to attract females, while said females often look so incredibly drab. Though, more than just being presentable to the females, it makes sense that a female would be less visually interesting since they'll be watching over the eggs, hiding in the nest, and they need to camouflage far more in order to ensure the survival of themselves and their children. After all, what's going to attract your attention more? The barely noticeable bird staying still, or the super colorful rainbow that just flew past you at Mach 5? I think we both know the answer. So long story short, despite being a peaceful species that doesn't care to battle, the Pidove Line will throw down for a shot at some cloaca. I can't make that a shirt. That's a very tempting sentence. A shot at some cloaca. That's horrible. I'm so sorry. We have one more rivalry ability Pokemon, and then it's all lore-based rivalry from here on in. It's not a real animal, but a dragon, as we have the Axew Line. Now this one gets tricky, because there are no real hints as to why this is even a thing. They don't talk about it in the anime that I could find, they aren't shown or said to be aggressive with each other in the games, and it was originally a bit of a headache for me a long time ago trying to figure this out. That was until I realized one very important lore-related detail. Iris and Drayden are the 8th gym leaders and dragon specialists of Pokemon Black and White. It just depends on which version you play. In lore, there are a couple of different ways their relationship has gone, but it mostly lands on Iris and Drayden having a strong relationship with each other, where Drayden serves as a father figure for Iris, while also training her rowdy nature into something more concentrated, thanks to her incredible battle skills, giving her something to live up to and surpass. On one hand, Iris has an all-female Pokemon team, while Drayden has an all-male Pokemon team. Add in the fact that they have the same exact teams of a Fractured Druddigon and an Ace Haxorus, and it all falls into place. Though you'd expect them to not have rivalry but a different ability, but I guess this is how they expressed this. The likely primary reason why the Axew Line has the rivalry ability then is found through Iris and Drayden being opposites to each other and not anything that we can find in nature as of yet. Maybe one day we'll learn how these creatures battle for territory, as they do mark trees with their sharp tusks, but that's for future us to find out. It's no secret that Hydreigon is a demon of the skies, though that's not necessarily its fault, as even the Pokédex states that since people have treated it poorly for generations, it tends to continue to fall into this role of being a powerful and terrifying destroyer. Even so, Hydreigon is a Pokemon that will eat everything in its path, and if it can't eat it, then it will burn it until there is nothing left for you, me, or anybody else. It really is a huge threat, especially in older days of the world. But this is where the stories come from, at least in Galar, with the Shield entry specifically stating there's a Galarian fairy tale that describes a beautiful Sylveon vanquishing a dreadful dragon Pokemon. This story is held up by official artwork showing a clash between the two Pokemon in the moonlit night. Dragons have long since been a powerful and dreaded species since the beginning of Pokemon, but eventually, the fairy typing would be added to push them back. And while Galar wasn't the generation to introduce fairy Pokemon, let alone Sylveon in specific, it was the place of old castles, medieval times, and plenty of fairy tales, especially as it is the, at least currently known, home of the Fairy King Calyrex. When we think about those fairy tales where dreaded dragons destroyed castles or kept princesses locked away in tall towers, it makes sense that the fairy Pokemon would be the one to save the day. This is doubled down on with Hydreigon being a dark dragon Pokemon, meaning that Sylveon's Moonblast, a move that it gets at level 50, would serve as the perfect attack to slay the dreaded dragon and the perfect backdrop to their artwork. But what if I were to say there was another dragon of the night that is a greater threat than Hydreigon? It might sound like blasphemy, but Hydreigon is nothing more than a pitiful child at night. I mean, don't get me wrong, shouldn't say that. This child is incredibly powerful and will throw a temper tantrum strong enough to wipe the state of Alabama off the map, but it doesn't hold a torch in the middle of the night to Noivern. Why, you may ask? Well, it's because the entire Hydreigon line has incredibly poor eyesight from living in caves for so long and then having their eyes covered when they were a Zweilous. Actually, can I do that with my hair now? Has it gotten to that point? I'm kind of, yeah, look at that. Look at that. I'm a Zweilous now, baby. This is terrible. Send it back. Send it all back. Acrylic glasses. What are you gonna do? So while during the daytime they have an easier time, the darkness of night effectively gives them night blindness and reduces Hydreigon's field of vision, making it so that faster Pokemon who can camouflage with the night can harry it and give it a swift demise if not death, by 1,000 paper cuts. And this is where Noivern fits in. A speedy Pokemon that not only blends with the night, but also a Pokemon that controls the power of sound. Because if you can't see, the best option is to listen very closely so you can react in time. But when the opponent is boom bursting all over the place and reducing your sense of hearing to nothingness, you're stuck in an echo chamber of darkness with no way out, only waiting to be slain by the largest dragon bat of the night that we, at least currently, are aware of. Of course, when daytime rolls around, Hydreigon might get its revenge on Noivern, but that's assuming it survives the night to begin with. And so a long-held rivalry between generations of dragons is born. In part predator-prey and part rival relationship, there's Toxapex and Bruxish. Though the only way we're able to tell that this is more than just the predator-prey scenario is through Toxapex's Violet Dex entry. Toxapex gets into fierce battles with Bruxish over areas where warm ocean currents flow, but the odds are always against it, meaning that Toxapex, who typically enjoys colder environments, has actively decided that it would charge out and into Bruxish's home turf and pick a fight. Also, for clarification, the only way we find Marini or Toxapex in Alola is typically through SOS calls from Corsola. They're not really running around at all and are likely hiding away closer to the seafloor where the water temperatures are colder and more stabilized. It also makes sense to be its home because it traditionally hunts Corsola and Pincurchin, who are also primarily going to be on the sea floor. On the opposite side of this, Bruxish is interesting in that it serves to grind up or counter these tougher Pokemon amongst other Pokemon with calcium carbonate bodies like Shellder. Honestly, Bruxish is a pretty strong Pokemon that helps keep other dangerous Pokemon at bay, and so in Alola, they'll typically even use it on the beach to help keep said dangerous Pokemon away. But of course, Toxapex refuses to stand down and stay out of Bruxish's turf, so we just have these constant and simple battles. You might not count this next one, but I couldn't resist at least talking about it because Alolan Exeggutor often gets mistaken for a regular palm tree, and we get a little bit of hijinks between it and Pokemon like Crabrawler or Makuhita. In any scenario with either Pokemon, they're punching trees for their own reasons. Crabrawler because they want to knock fruit down and pile it up, as they not only use it as a food source, but also compete with other Crabrawler for the larger piles of fruit. Alternatively, they'll climb up trees just like real crabs do, so they can have a higher vantage point against prey and predators. Alternatively to this, Makuhita will punch trees not only for fruit, but primarily as a way to train their bodies. And in any of these scenarios, if they accidentally strike or climb up an Alolan Exeggutor, it is going to slam down its head with the power of 1 billion very angry hammers and nail them into the ground. So technically, they aren't exactly rivals. It's more like a really funny scenario that commonly happens, and they should probably just avoid. Here comes two of what I would like to believe are my top 10 Pokemon of all, Corviknight and Tinkaton. Now, despite Tinkaton not naturally learning any moves that would be super effective against the big metal bird, she still decides that Corviknight will be her primary target for collecting metal from, as Tinkaton launches rocks into the air to knock it out. More than that, though, there's this one baller animation where a Corviknight flies overhead and the Tinkaton leaves her trainer, and not only chases the Corviknight down, but goes as far as whipping her hammer at it as she just launches from building to building the entire time as she tries to take down this Corviknight. It's actually wild just how this isn't malicious in the terms of it wants to kill and eat it, but rather this is just absolute joy. Tinkaton doesn't see Corviknight as prey, she sees it as another upgrade for her Gigaton hammer. Which, could you imagine a mega form for this Pokemon? An even larger hammer for it? Because I doubt it would even just add any armor to itself. No, it wouldn't want to change its appearance whatsoever. What it truly would desire is more and more power with a bigger hammer to strike down its enemies with. It's actually because of this sheer unbridled and unstoppable level of pure excitement that people of Paldea have decided to use flocks of Squawkabilly as their taxi service, because otherwise, can you imagine the sheer amount of collateral damage, if not deaths, that would happen just because little old Tinkaton wanted to add some new metal to her hammer? So I guess if you see any fully plucked Corviknight anytime soon, then at least you know who did it. The rivalry between Barraskewda and Finizen is a bit confusing. They compete over the same food, and when we look at what they are, we have a Barracuda and a dolphin, which, sure, they both can eat a bunch of fish, and they do live in the same areas within Paldea, but is there any other reason beyond this? Well, from what I could find, it does turn out that dolphins will eat Barracuda if they have the energy and feel like it's worthwhile. It's not the easiest, of course, considering these big chompers that Barracuda do have, but dolphins are some of the few natural predators of them. So we can say this is very similar to what we see in Zangoose and Seviper, though not nearly as aggressive. Instead, it seems like in order to diversify its diet and stay further away from Finizen territory, Barraskewda has not only managed to add birds to its diet like Wingull, but also reach much higher speeds to fight back, get to prey faster, or even simply run away if necessary. Nothing too complicated here, just a really strange interaction, and you might even consider it a predator-prey species relationship rather than it being an actual rivalry relationship. As thick as thieves these Pokemon are not, as Phantom Thief wannabes, Nidoking and Purrloin are rivals in their own respective crafts. Both of their names are plays on the words or phrases to purloin and to nick it or steal it. Pretty straightforward, and it's even more obvious with Thievul, thief, and Leopard, liar, leopard, I guess. All of them making it clear that there's trickery and thievery afoot. For the Purrloin line, Purrloin feels amusement from the frustration of those it steals from. It will put on a cute act in order to get its victims to let their guards down, and should this facade succeed, the victim is left with stinging scratches and broken pride from its laughter. Leopard, its evolution, has well-developed muscles that allows it to run silently and strike opponents from behind. It has also been known to vanish and reappear without warning, thus making it a fantastic thief. Though, Nickit is also known as a cunning thief, who enjoys stealing food from others instead of spending their time finding food on their own. They have incredibly soft pads that compress lightly when in contact with the ground, allowing them to move silently as well without being noticed. They can use their tails to sweep their paw prints, so it can even be hard to locate them. When Thievul, its evolution, finds a potential target, it will secretly mark a scent on them. It then uses that sense to track and stalk its targets, and by using its lithe body and claws, it steals the target's food and eggs from them when they least expect it. So, you have two lines of Pokemon whose descriptions are incredibly similar, who have very similar niches and so much more. They're primarily stated to compete over territory, but that's expected of something that acts like a gang. They keep their territory, meaning they can keep fresh or good targets. And of course, good targets mean good money, or at least in the case of these Pokemon, good food, better survival, Papa John's. Recently, I completed the ecology for the routes of Galar and surrounding areas, and the first route, you run into Nickit. Meanwhile, Purrloin is found on routes 2 and 3 in the original Black and White games, the places between cities rather than just the small town you start out in. In other words, these two Pokemon are fighting with each other, scouting and waiting for newbies, the naive, the easily tricked and stolen from. It's like targeting a tourist when they first arrive in the city before they've learned any lessons, and you are going to make out with the greatest motherlode. I also spoke on this next entry in my previous video all about parasitic Pokemon, but we'll talk about it again here, as Dwebble is a Pokemon that makes its home inside of rocks, very much like a hermit crab makes its home inside of shells. The problem with this is not when it decides to use its acid to bore a hole in a random rock, but rather when it decides to melt the faces off of Roly-Coly and Roggenrola. Well, maybe not the face of Roggenrola, since that big hole is actually its ear. So maybe it's more akin to the idea that it's widening Roggenrola's ear, which only makes the situation worse. Like the rumors of earwigs scuttling into people's ears is horrible. Getting that image out of our heads though, this is not a predator-prey relation technically. More parasitic in nature, as Dwebble is a living creature that then lives inside or on another living creature while harming it. But simultaneously, we find that it's not always targeting them, and our rock Pokemon are aware of the danger. From there, it makes it clear that they aren't going to tolerate Dwebble's presence in their territory, and it's going to try and crush the strange hermit crab Pokemon. You know, I actually kind of wonder if Dwebble is only considered bug rock in typings because it lives in the rock. Could we get this thing a seashell and make it a bug water type? I guess that's still calcium based because it's still a shell, which would be a rock, but I don't know, you know, Pokemon logic could win that out and make it bug water. Just a few ideas. We make a second round back around the track to Thievul, but only because Boltund is around to chase it off. This is a fox and a hound situation, and not in the friendly way, because when we look at foxes in the real world, we could find them literally being thieves, skulking around in the night and finding their way into chicken coops. Whether that's to eat the chickens or just their eggs is not something anyone wants to risk. And so a good hunting or guard dog is everything you need to keep these thieves out. Boltund then fits that mold perfectly, while running at a speed of 50 miles per hour or roughly 80 kilometers an hour. If I were a Thievul, I'd think I'd rather stay very far away from Boltund and its territories or the farms it protects, because it's even stated that they can run for 3 days straight without getting tired, and so that fox is likely not surviving to see the next day. And to drive all of this home and this connection home as to why it even exists, Boltund is likely based specifically on the English foxhound. And with a name like that, it's pretty clear why Boltund and Thievul have this relationship while also being first introduced in Galar. Alright, I have no idea why Pokemon decided that Golisopod and Grapploct would be sworn enemies, but apparently they are. Though to be fair, in the Shield Dex entry, it specifically states when Golisopod and Grapploct battle, the loser becomes the winner's meal. I understand that both of these Pokemon are opportunistic predators, with Golisopod being more openly opportunistic in its diet, but there's really only two possible reasons that I can think of that would be why they are enemies. One is because they live in similar areas, which are the waters of Galar, which Galar itself is an incredibly harsh region where the strongest, most adaptable, or the most opportunistic of Pokemon are able to not only survive, but also thrive. So when we put two of these Pokemon, who are higher on the quote-unquote food chain, together, it makes sense that they would fight. Though there's one other interesting detail here, and it's that they are both strong masters of their respective martial arts. Grapploct being an octopus wrestler with jiu-jitsu motifs, and Golisopod, of course, being a shogun-esque samurai, both representing the height of their craft as they then test their mettle against each other. And unfortunately, unlike real life, the loser gets eaten. Unless that does happen in real life, would make things a lot more interesting. A fight I never want to witness would be the clashing between Centiskorch and Scolipede. I do not like centipedes. I would dare say that they are a phobia of mine. I see one, I freeze, I suddenly go into a I have to kill this thing mindset. But there's no way in Giratina's freshly distorted world that I would ever be able to just take a boot to these massive centipedes. Not unless it was an absurdly large boot. Dynamax boot. Gigantamax boot. On the surface, we can chalk it up as two massive centipedes fighting for everything we've talked about this whole time. Blah, 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 territory, blah, blah, food, blah, blah, we're similar species and fit in the same niche, so I can't stand it and we're gonna fight. And then they kissed. But in all seriousness, they do fit in the same niche of giant bug-type Pokemon that are also incredibly aggressive predators of other Pokemon. They really can't cohabitate areas with each other, let alone with themselves, because otherwise it would deplete the sources of prey for each other and their own evolutionary lines. Because of this, not only would it be uncommon to find them in the same areas, but it would also be uncommon to find multiple Scolipede or multiple Centiskorch in the same areas. If we want the technical ecology term for this, one term is described as the carrying limit. How many of the same species can an area support before lack of food, disease, or more territorial disputes begin? And of course, as you would imagine, since they often fight over territory, whoever wins the fight makes the meal of the other. Big bugs gotta eat too. Our last Pokemon before we get into legendary and mythical Pokemon beef is the bug beef that occurs between Spidops and Scyther. On one hand, Scyther is another incredibly aggressive Pokemon that even competes against its own kind to be the leader of their own packs. It's a praying mantis that also has incredibly powerful sides, capable of slicing entire trees in half with ease, while also vivisecting humans who enter their territory with blinding speed. Kind of a big deal, and has been ever since the first generation. To follow, we have the 9th gen Spidops, who has threads it uses not only to make traps, but also those threads are said to be strong enough to combat Scyther. More specifically, its pre-evolution tarantula states, the ball of threads wrapped around its body is elastic enough to deflect the sides of Scyther, this Pokemon's natural enemy. Now, I will admit I do remember there being a mention of fighting proper between Scyther and Spidops, but the only confirmation I have is Bulbapedia stating it, but they don't quite give a source as to where that came from. So I can't seem to confirm whether they are predators of each other, if they just spar, or what's going on for sure. All I know is that when you have a strong thread that is able to withstand an attack from a Pokemon able to slice trees with ease, it makes sense that they would be rivals if not sworn enemies. A good way to test your mettle and try to push yourself further, get stronger sides, get more durable threats. As we move into these more legendary and mythical Pokemon, we're going to start off as vaguely rivals and lean into the Pokemon eventually that are absolutely throwing hands on sight. In addition, this gets a little bit more vague in terms of their real life counterparts, so we're going to be sticking primarily to Pokemon lore. We begin with the legendary birds of Galar, with the three of them meeting at the Dyna Tree every year to get a taste of that good Dyna fruit. The opening cutscene is the three of them attacking each other to get the first taste, but we can pretty much confirm through the manga that they don't mean to be truly antagonistic or lethal towards one another. It's kind of like when you and your best friends have been waiting a long time for dinner to be done and you jab at each other to get the first plate of food. Nothing too crazy here in a pretty short entry. A classic rivalry between natural-born and clone Pokemon comes to a head between Mew and Mewtwo. Their rivalry was pretty short-lived, but at the same time, it was really a battle for Mewtwo to prove his place in the world. To prove that cloned Pokemon truly do belong in this world just as much, if not more, than naturally born Pokemon. And if that sounds a little out of place and you think I'm romanticizing the original movie, I assure you that I am not, and that was the original intent of Mewtwo. Despite this though, there's still some media here and there where we find Mew and Mewtwo fighting with one another for no other reason whatsoever. Not to say that it's canon lore, but it's just interesting to note still exists. If you're interested on more of Mewtwo's hidden story and inspirations alongside Mew, I have a whole video on that as well that you could check out. Moving on, when time and space clash, not just the world but all of existence pays the price in their eternal struggle. With Palkia and Dialga in the triplet of Sinnoh movies, we get to see not only their clashes, but the greater effects of what happens because of their battles. The legends even state that should they ever meet, that all of existence could just stop existing altogether. And even if we look at the games where we get to see the sheer amount of power only one of them has, as a singular roar is all it takes to destroy what is modernly known as Spear Pillar. Their beef is so incredibly legendary that it has actually caused multiple generations of conflict. I'm not just talking about the Diamond and Pearl clan, but also when we look closer at two people who were once part of those clans, likely as leaders. We see the assumed ancestors of Archie and Maxie, with diamonds relating to the earth and heat, the pressure required for carbon to suddenly turn into diamond, and pearls also relating to the sea and ocean's bounty, both being corrupted over the decades to turn from Diamond and Pearl into Magma and Aqua clans. What I'm trying to say is that just by people finding out Dialga and Palkia existed and worshipping them, thinking that they were the Great Sinnoh, it resulted in at least two great conflicts between separate groups within the world of Pokemon, and who knows what else they could have caused. As a final note, Dialga and Palkia aren't necessarily meant to always fight with one another, but rather they fought because their home dimensions were intersecting with one another, a situation that only happened because Arceus was waking up. This results in instability and destruction in the Distortion World, which makes Giratina angry, and when the Distortion World is destroyed, our world becomes destroyed. This is why Giratina had attacked Dialga for starters. Honestly, the whole thing is kind of a mess, and if we really want to, we could talk about Giratina and Arceus' relationship, but even they aren't meant to be rivals. Giratina was simply a creature full of rage and power that was banished to an already created and existing torn Distortion world, which, even saying that is a little bit redundant, since the literal translation of the Distortion world's name is just the Torn World. Ultimately, we might not consider any of these scenarios as rivalries. It's more that some unfortunate and unexpected scenarios happened, and these great god Pokemon were aiming to defend their homes. Almost like true rivals helping each other from time to time, we have Darkrai and Cresselia. Their history gets incredibly complicated, and in all reality, Darkrai is a Pokemon that has, in lore, always struggled with controlling its powers. It doesn't matter if it's the games or the anime, that is simply always the case. Well, okay, I guess one exception is within the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games, in which it is actually evil, and that is an alternative universe. Nevertheless, Cresselia is the foil to Darkrai, being a Pokemon that is able to resolve the issues that Darkrai unfortunately naturally causes just by existing, and they have fought with each other. Which Darkrai has the problem of putting nightmares into minds, or even putting people into eternal nightmares. Despite all of this though, Darkrai is not inherently evil, but rather misunderstood. It is still an antagonist in some capacity, but not something that should be openly and completely feared. And not to plug another video, I don't mean to keep doing that, but there's a lot that are really relevant to this video, I realize. But if you want a breakdown that I can't provide here without adding another half hour to this video, go check out my video about how we've been wrong about the original dragon. I talk plenty about dreams, Darkrai, and Cresselia, their proper inspirations and breakdowns, and it would add so much to this video, but be irrelevant to this video. The next rivalry is more than just a one-on-one or a species. This is the entire Swords of Justice team and their rivalry with humanity. They simply do not trust humanity at all in lore and serve as the protectors of Pokemon wherever they are, or at least wherever they are in Unova. This is all because many years ago, there was another war within Unova that spanned across the lands, and at one point, the Moor of Icarus was caught in between the two warring factions of humanity. This war caused an incredible amount of damage, and the greatest of which was specifically the Great Fire over the Moor that destroyed the homes of Pokemon and even caused their deaths. And this is actually where Keldeo comes in. At least by lore standards, Keldeo was a Pokemon separated from its parents and would then join the Swords of Justice after being rescued. Despite this, we have yet to see others of its kind, let alone Keldeo's parents. But after this tragic event for many Pokemon, the Swords of Justice fought against humanity on the side of Pokemon, and we can assume ended the war that was occurring at the time. From then on, they would serve on to make sure something like this would never happen again. Cobalion, their leader, is directly noted to punish any humans that hurt Pokemon. Terrakion has been noted to be strong enough to crash through castle walls. That isn't something that they just say, that must have happened. While Virizion is the least direct until we see its ZA Dex entry that states it confounds opponents with whirlwind-like movements and then carves them up mercilessly with its sharp horns. There is a very good chance the three of these Pokemon have a proper kill count against humanity that we just aren't exactly aware of, and I don't know if that's more horrifying or if the fact that there are mechanical futuristic versions of them that go against nature that exist. We don't know if those Paradox versions are man-made or if they are naturally occurring, because Pokemon can adapt and change with their environment, and there might be a more futuristic environment, and I have to at least admit neither of those sound like a really good scenario for Pokemon in the world. Can you imagine if they are man-made versions and how twisted that would actually be? That the Pokemon that were set to serve and protect other Pokemon from humanity were copied by humanity to then destroy other Pokemon in that capacity, or even each other? Awful future. Our semi-finale is the on-site beef between Rayquaza and Deoxys. I think this truly needs no real introduction or explanation if you've been into Pokemon for even a short time, as it is absolutely absurd just how violently aggressive Rayquaza is against Deoxys. We could see it point blank hyper beam it, we see it destroy a massive asteroid that it then comes out of in the Delta episode, and anytime this Pokemon pops up, Rayquaza is not far behind. But we technically do not understand why this is the case at all. We can guess at a couple of different reasons, and the two that I land on are: 1, knowing that Deoxys is originally a virus contained within a meteor. It only moves around and exists after getting blasted with energy that then turns it into the Deoxys that we know. Even in the Delta episode, it still exists inside that meteor and is released after Rayquaza slams into it like the great serpentine spear that it is. And if that's the first time they are canonically introduced to each other, that's a pretty bad first introduction. Now, it might be wrong to do, but if I found out there was something living inside of a giant meteor that threatened the home that I have served to protect for literal thousands of years, I too would assume that the thing living inside said meteor was piloting it and is also a massive threat that needs to be destroyed. The other possible reason as to why it has or why they have beef with each other is that maybe since Deoxys is a space virus, and Rayquaza is able to survive in space indefinitely on its own, being a creature that doesn't just exist in our atmosphere, it may have actually encountered Deoxys' kind before and knows that it would be a greater threat if it stayed on the planet, whether Deoxys means to be a threat or not. To explain better, Rayquaza in the manga is explained to generate ozone, and any of the lore keepers that write it are effectively necessary to help grant Rayquaza power, but also causes the death of the lore keeper through ozone poisoning, which I'll have to talk about in a different video, but then that might mean anyone we see riding Rayquaza, such as the child in the storybook within the ZA DLC, may actually be long gone, not by age. Nevertheless, Rayquaza can survive all on its own and travel as far as it needs or wants to, all while consuming meteors for energy, and may have then encountered multiple Deoxys in its past and has attacked them for anything that they may have done to it. You likely expected these last two as our finale, as no two Pokemon in the entire history of the franchise comes anywhere near as close to the rivalry between Kyogre and Groudon. This isn't a one-time beef, this isn't just some on-site stuff, and this isn't a fight that will ever end. It is canonically stated that when these two fight, they are evenly matched and will continue to fight until the world itself is destroyed and all life ceases to exist. They are the embodiments of the land and the sea, Pokemon that represent the endless expanses and changes of both throughout all of time. They brought land, heat, water, humidity, and so much more through their battles. Without them, we can assume the Earth would have never fully formed into something that could sustain life, as then Rayquaza would eventually end the fighting and change the climate to something stable and survivable, being the only Pokemon that can end this battle. I still find it wild that Groudon can effectively create land and magma as it wishes, evaporating all water, while Kyogre is able to summon infinite amounts of rain and even fly around without the need for water as it floods the earth. And that's not even talking about their primal forms. And of course, Rayquaza has to stop them time and time again, as they have fought at the creation of the world, a second time when the meteor crashed down and unleashed primal energy, and a third time in the modern day. It does not matter how much time passes, these two will always be duking it out on sight. The only good news is that at least, other than Rayquaza popping in to slap them both and stop their fighting, they've also teamed up in the manga to stop the massive meteor from crashing down on the planet and destroying it. So it really is a proper rivalry, and not just sheer, unadulterated hatred that they have for each other like Rayquaza and Deoxys have. But what are your thoughts now that we've gone through all of this? I know I didn't include Ogerpon and Petrunch as much as I kind of wanted to, mainly because their conflict is over a pretty bad decision on Petrunch's side, and it feels more like Petrunch has a one-sided rivalry with Ogerpon and it's just an angry little child, because, you know, it's kind of just designed to be that way. And who knows, maybe I'll just cover a video just on them one day, and maybe it'll involve Okami. I don't know. Either way, leave a comment, share the video around. It all helps the channel and the reach of the video. In addition, if you'd like to go the extra mile, again, become a member of the channel for as little as $3 a month here or on Patreon and get early access to videos, behind the scenes info, and even get members exclusive videos every month. The first of which was my own personal journey throughout my life with Pokemon. The first games I played, some of my first Pokemon, the legendaries that stuck with me, so on and so forth. And supporting the channel in any way makes a massive difference and is greatly appreciated. But for now, as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time.